Hello and good day, everyone. Welcome to our second week of classes for our course Information Management or DC 24. For our topic today, we are going to discuss the context of database management. So, let us begin. For our intended learning outcomes or ILO, number one, we have summarize the function of a database or functions of database. Number two, appreciate or understand the roles of a data analyst or DA and a database administrator or DBA. Number three, recognize the differences between data and databases or database. And number four, familiarize data models. Topics to be discussed today are number one, basic concepts and definitions. Number two, data versus information, which I am sure by now you have already um, have an idea of what data and informations are. Right? So information system concepts. Number four, roles and advantages of the DBMS or database management system. Number five, the types of database. Okay. Now, data versus information. So what comes into mind when we hear the word data or the word information? Data is the complete list of facts and details like text, observations, figures, symbols, and description of things. So generally, they are the raw list of facts that are processed or will be processed to gain information. On the other hand, information is processed data, organized and structured data. It provides the context for data. Moving on, so database is a collection of related data and it is a collection of facts and figures that can be processed to produce information. Mostly, data represents recordable facts. Data aids in producing information, which is based on facts. So for example, if we have, let's say, data about marks or yung mga scores ng students natin, okay? So you have the top list, okay? You have students that have average score of 90 all throughout the semester. So once you have these information, you can then conclude sino ba yung mga top performers natin for this particular subjects or sino ba yung mga nagpe-perform na medyo below average for this particular course. Okay, so all those can be noticed, or we can extract that, we can identify that in with the use of database or information. Okay. Next we have is database management systems. Alright, so or what we call DBMS in short refers to the technology of storing and retrieving users' data with utmost efficiency along with appropriate security measures. Okay, so a database management system is a collection. Okay, so collection siya of programs that manages the database structure and controls access to the data stored in the database. Database management systems or DBMS in short refers to the technology of storing and retrieving users' data with utmost efficiency along with appropriate security measures. Right, so a database management system or DBMS is a collection of programs. Okay, so it is a collection of programs that manages the database structure and controls access to the data stored in the database. So the DBMS serves as the maybe sort of connection between the user and the database. Okay, so database structure itself is stored as a collection of files. So we can access the data in those files through the use of DBMS or database management system. The database management system receives all application requests and translates them into the complex operations required to fulfill a particular request. The database hides himself, or database management system hides much of the database's internal complexities from the application programs and users. So a database management system stores data in such a way that it becomes easier to retrieve, manipulate, and produce information. Alright? So traditionally, data was organized in file formats. A modern DBMS has the following characteristics. So number one, real-world entity. Okay. Number two, relation-based tables. Number three, isolation of data and applications. Number four, less redundancy. Number five, consistency. Number six, query language. Okay, so let's go back to number one. So what do we mean when we say real-world entity? Okay, so first, let us recognize that DBMS was a new concept then, and all the research was done to make it overcome the deficiencies in traditional style of database management. Okay, and for number one, real-world entity. Okay, we can say a modern DBMS is more realistic and uses the real-world entity or entities to design its architecture. It uses the behavior and attributes too. For example, a school database may use students as an entity and their age as an attribute. Okay, so let us discuss first what are entities and what are attributes. So we are going to have an in-depth discussion with this later on, but for now, let's take a look at the context. Okay, so entity. Entity is an object that exists. It doesn't have to do anything. Okay, so it just has to exist. In a database administration, an entity can be a single thing, a person, okay, a tao, or lugar or place or object. So data can be stored about such entities. Okay, so when we say a person is an example of an entity. And what else? So a house, or maybe a department can be classified as an entity. Okay, next we have the attributes. Ano nga ba yung attributes natin? Attribute defines the information about that entity or the entity that needs to be stored. Okay, if the entity is an employee, attribute, okay, could include the name and the ID of the employee, or health plan, etc. Okay, so for example, you have a person that is an entity. Now we are going to identify the attributes of that person. So for example, let's say, ano ba yung height niya? Okay, or yung physical appearance niya, attributes. Slim ba siya? Malaki ba tiyan niya? Mahaba ba buhok niya? Okay, does he have blue eyes or brown eyes? So those are attributes of that person, which is an entity. Okay, so ito yung sinasabi nating entity and attributes. Alright, so real world entity, number one. Okay, so a modern DBMS is more realistic and uses real world entities to design its architectures. Okay, so mahalaga ito kasi bubuo tayo ng mga data models. Okay, so number two, we have relation-based tables. When we say relation-based tables, okay, so DBMS allows entities and relations among them to form tables. Okay, so later on bubuo tayo ng mga tables and ano ba ang mga requirements doon. We will understand that. If hindi niyo masyado mag-grasp ngayon yung concept, don't worry, later on we are going to have an in-depth discussion about that. A user can understand the architecture of a database just by looking at the table names. Okay? So ito yung relation-based tables. Next we have is isolation of data and application. Okay, so a database system is entirely different than its data. A database is an active entity, whereas data is said to be passive. Okay, so difference is active and passive, on which the database works and organizes. So DBMS also stores metadata, which is data about data, to ease its own process. Okay, so when we say metadata, you are referring to some sort of definition for that particular data, parang dictionary. Okay, so you have a particular data, and then you have the definition of that data. So that is what we call metadata. Right, so next we have is less redundancies. Okay, so ulitin natin, traditionally, data was organized in file formats. Okay, so a modern database management system has the following characteristics. So ito yung mga characteristics na diniscuss natin. Okay, so number 4, less redundancies or redundancy. DBMS follows the rules of normalization. Okay, so what is normalization? So later on we'll discuss that as well. Which splits a relation when any of its attributes is having redundancies in values. So normalization is a mathematical or a rich and scientific process that reduces data redundancies. Okay, so yun na. Yun si normalization. Normalization is a process of reducing data redundancies. Okay, so ito yung mga characteristics natin, ano? Number 4. Number 5 we have is consistency. Consistency is a state where every relation in a database remains consistent. There exist methods and techniques which can detect attempt of leaving database in inconsistent state. A database management system can provide greater consistency as compared to earlier forms of data storing applications like file processing systems. So consistency, this is the most or one of the most important characteristics when we are talking about DBMS is consistency. Okay? Hindi pwedeng pabago-bago. Alright? And for the last one, we have query language. Okay, so query language, DBMS is equipped with query language, which makes it more efficient to retrieve and manipulate data. Okay, a user can apply as many as different filtering options as required to retrieve a set of data. Traditionally, it was not possible where file processing system was used. So, query language. So, ito, isa sa mga may enjoy nyo dito sa ating subject or course natin for information management is yung mga query language. We are going to learn about SQL or MySQL. Ito yung paano ba nagre-retrieve ng data sa database. Okay? Paano ba tayo mag-filter? Alright, so for example, sa Facebook, if you are going to search for a particular friend or kakilala nyo from let's say childhood friend na alam nyo lang ang pangalan niya pero hindi pa kayo nakikita and gusto mo siya hanapin sa Facebook, okay, so tatype nyo lang yung pangalan niya dun sa search box and then it would extract or it would reveal the data supposedly na related sa kanya. So if you are looking for John or John Smith, or if you're looking for Juan de la Cruz, you would type Juan de la Cruz sa query or the search box, and then it would then extract or it would then show the results connected to Juan de la Cruz. Okay, So later, alamin natin kung paano ba nag-extract ng mga ganun. Okay? Alright. Next. So again, this is an example of an entity and attribute. So here we have an example of a fashion model and a customer. Okay, so for a customer, you have entity, customer. You have the attributes, of course, yung ID niya, name niya, first name, could be a middle name as well, surname or yung last name niya, date of birth, address, phone. So these are all attributes of that customer. It would for this case, it would identify that customer. Sino ba siya? So just by knowing the customer's ID, you can now identify sino yung customer na yon. Okay? So that is an attribute. For fashion model, yan, ito na, fashion model. Another example of an entity. So you have name, height, alright? Yung weight niya, yung dress size niya, hair color niya, alright? Eye color niya. Okay, so these are the attributes associated for that particular model. Alright, so by knowing kung talagang kabisado nyo talaga yung itsura niya, alright? So once you have the attributes, alam mo na agad, ay, ito pala si Crush, ito pala siya. Alright, so yun si attributes and entities. Moving on, we have now the applications or implications of DBMS. Alright, so these are the characteristics or properties. So we have acid properties, or tinatawag nating atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Okay, so normally shortened as acid. DBMS follows the concept of acid. Okay, so atomacy, this property states that a transaction must be treated as an atomic unit, that is either all of its operations are executed or none. So ito yung atomicity, ito yung all or nothing ang tinatawag nila, okay? It's either execute niya lahat or hindi. Right? So there must be no state in a database where a transaction is left partially completed. Kailangan kompleto siya. States should be defined either before the execution of the transaction or after the execution or abortion, failure, and of the transaction. Next, dun sa C naman, consistency. Okay, the database must remain in consistent state after any transactions. No transaction should have any adverse effect on the data residing in the database. If the database was, let's say, in a consistent state before the execution of the transaction, it must remain consistent after execution of the transaction as well. So later on, we are going to dive into ano ba itong mga transactions na to, okay? So malalaman natin yan. Remember this, consistency. The third one is isolation. Alright? Isolation, and then the fourth one is durability. For isolation, in a database system where more than one transactions are being executed simultaneously and in parallel. Pag sinabi nating parallel to, they are, ano ba yung parallel? Let's say two lines extending to a particular path that will not reach or will not cross each other. In other words, simultaneous and in parallel path. So the properties of isolation states that all the transaction will be carried out and executed as if it is the only transaction in the system. Right, so in other words, when we say simultaneous and in parallel, so sabay sila tatakbo and hindi sila mag-overlap. Okay? And the last, we have durability. Okay, so durability, the database should be durable. enough to hold all its latest updates, even if the system fails or restarts. Okay, so mahalaga ito. If a transaction updates a chunk of data in a database and commits, ano ba yung commits natin? Okay, so later we'll discuss commit. Then, the database will hold the modified data. If a transaction commits but the system fails before the data could be written on to the disk, then the data will be updated once the system springs back into action. So para kang pag nawawalan ka ng kuryente, saan siya magre-restart? Ano ba, save ba niya yung mga data mo? Okay, so durability. Okay, so that is just in a smaller sense, or in a lower sense rather. Right, so next is the security. Security features like multiple views offered security to some extent, where users are unable to access data of other users and departments. DBMS offers methods to impose. Okay, so security, it's another feature of, or it's another application of DBMS. Okay, so kailangan secured yung ating data, no? Kasi syempre may mga level of access yan. You have one database and it is being accessed remotely. Okay, so paano ba natin i-limit yung mga transactions na papasok or lalabas? So that is the job of the DBMS. Okay, yun yung trabaho ng system natin. Okay, ginagawa niya. Next, you have the multi-user and concurrent access. DBMS supports multi-user environments and allows them to access and manipulate data in parallel. So yun yung kanina, simultaneous, pero hindi maapektuhan yung ibang mga transactions. So multi-user and concurrent access. And then last we have is multiple views. DBMS offers multiple views for different users. Okay, so meaning to say you have a particular storage, or you have a particular database, and it would be offering multiple views, let's say different locations siya. Okay, so it would be possible, okay, through the use of DBMS. And then of course that would be beneficial, lalo na kapag you are talking about multiple users or transactions. So for example, yung Google Drive, let's say yung gumagamit ng Google Spreadsheet. Okay, so this is just an example. If you're going to use a spreadsheet, of course that is online, but you can also share that with different users or several users. So let's say 5 kayong gumagamit ng spreadsheet na yun, and then you are all editing a particular paragraph, or let's say you are editing that document online. It would all reflect in real time, right? So yun yung tinatawag nating multiple views din. Simultaneously you are all viewing the document online and editing it online, pero isa lang yung source niya. Okay, so that is, those are the some of the applications or implications of DBMS. So information system is a system composed of people and computers that processes or interprets information. So the term is also sometimes used in more restricted sense to refer to only the software used to run a computerized database, or to refer to only a computer system. So information system is an academic study of systems with a specific reference to information and the complementary networks of hardware and software, so that people and organizations use to collect, filter, process, and create, and also distribute. So an information system is any organized system for the collection, organization, storage, and communication of information. Okay, so entire sectors of the economy are nearly inconceivable without substantial investments to or in information system. So inconceivable, meaning to say that you cannot, we cannot grasp, or we cannot. It's hard to to come into existence when we're talking about big companies like Amazon, eBay, Google. See, those are the big companies, right? So um, all these companies have invested, you know, they make use of what we call an information system. Okay, it's very hard for them to exist. It would be difficult for them to exist, if not impossible. All right, given the amount of transaction, the data, the daily reports, and everything. Okay, so yes, those are examples of big companies that are using information systems. But actually, right now or today, most companies are already invested in this. Okay, it's hard for a company to exist without these or without such systems. Okay, so next, impact. So ito yung binanggit ko kanina. So the entire sectors of economy are nearly inconceivable without substantial investment in information systems. Okay, so of course, those are just the example of the big companies, but there are so many companies. Okay, so there is a growing interdependence between a firm's ability to use information technology and its ability to implement corporate strategies and achieve corporate goals. Increasing market share, become the high quality or low cost producers, developing new products, increasing employee productivity, depend more and more on the kinds and quality of IS in the organization. So the more you understand about this relationship, the more valuable you will be as a manager. All right, so next we have is the contemporary approaches to information systems. So the study of information system is a multidisciplinary field. Contemporary approaches to information systems, the study of information systems is a multidisciplinary field. Okay, so contemporary, meaning to say living or occurring at the same time, and multidisciplinary, combining or involving several academic disciplines or professional specializations in an approach to a topic or a particular problem. Right? So we have the number one, for the approaches, contemporary approaches. Number one, we have technical approach. Okay, so technical approach, it emphasizes mathematical based models to study information systems as well as physical technologies and formal capabilities of the system. So I think technical approach natin, ano? And then we have the second one, which is the behavioral approach. So a focuses or is a strategic business integration, design, implementation, utilization, and management. So those are the behavioral approach. Okay, and then for the third is a combination of the two approaches, the technical and the behavior. So socio-technical systems, or STI, in organizational development is an approach to complex organizational work design that recognizes the interactions between people and technology in workplaces. So when we talk about technology, that is the technical approach, and then the people, which is the behavioral approach. Okay, so the term also refers to the interactions between societies, complex infrastructure, and human behavior. So that is the keyword there: human behavior and complex infrastructures. In this sense, society itself and most of its substructures are complex socio-technical systems. Moving on. So we have three activities that produce information. So I'm sure you are all familiar with this: the input, process, and output. So number